What were to happen if Yoruichi Shihoin were to become Ichigo's Zanpakuto? Now, if anyone in here is confused and is probably thinking some interesting thoughts about Yoruichi, what I'm talking about is there's a few theories around made by SixMysta Jonathan. Now, I don't know why I said Jonathan, but pretty much he made a theory saying that Yoruichi is actually Zanpakuto due to the fact that she never had been seen using a sword in the anime, nor ever attained Bankai or even used her Shikai, just her Shunko or like Koroko Kido and Hakudo mixed together, which I think is just similar to that of Azashiro Zanpakuto or Zakuru. But without further ado, guys, I'll be doing a series on Ichigo gaining Yoruichi as a Zanpakuto. And who knows, I might have some interesting relationship happen, whatever. Never mind, it doesn't matter. But without further ado, guys, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Alright, so we start this what if after the day, or just after Rukia had been taken back to Soul Society to be executed. Ichigo was lying there in his own pool of blood as would continue bleeding out. As what would happen is, for a second, obviously, throughout the whole year, Yoruichi has been alive in the Soul Society, and she even became head of her clan, the Shihoin clan. She had been looking for wielders to wield her power, to possibly evolve that power into something stronger. So what would happen is Yoruichi would see Ichigo as a possible candidate and would merge with his soul in a sense. But Yoruichi would still be like a character and shit, like, and all, like, you know, materialized in a sense. But pretty much what would happen is, due to Yoruichi merging with his soul, his wounds would start closing up as he would gain some type of high speed factor. As obviously, unfortunately, old man Zangetsu, like, you're not gonna be there anymore. Even though he is like the Quincy representation, he had said that he was Ichigo's Zanpakuto, so he wouldn't get anything like his usual Shikai or his Bankai, or his full bring Shikai, full bring Bankai, or his real Shikai, or his real Bankai. But I'm gonna be giving him Holification Mask and the Vastalorde form from Zangetsu. But pretty much after Ichigo's wounds would close up, Urahara would come and hover an umbrella over his head, showing the symbolism, as Urahara was his only ray of hope, as everything else was being rained upon. So Urahara would save him, as Ichigo would recover in Urahara's shop. So after maybe the night of him sleeping, his wounds had recovered quite quickly, as once he would get up, he would freak out, wondering what Rukia is or Uryu, as once he had came upon the scene, he had saw Uryu injured severely by Renji. As Urahara would explain to him that Rukia was taken to Soul Society, but now they have 2 weeks to do training to go save her. And he would ask Ichigo, would you like to do that? As Ichigo would smile and say, of course. As what would happen next, he would have that same Hakuda fight with, I actually can't remember her name, but she was one of Urahara's mod souls, as he and her would get into a hand-to-hand combat or Hakuda, and for some reason he was quite adaptful. He was even sending a few attacks towards her, as his Ryatsu would start to course through his body, almost as if awakening. As even for a second when he was about to hit her, he had his hand had been surrounded in a blue aura. Obviously this would be Shunko, and I'm just gonna let you know, guys, Ichigo's Shunko is gonna be blue instead of yellow, like the whole Raijin form, the lightning form that Yoruichi has is yellow, but since Ichigo's Ryatsu is sort of blue, or it's represented to be blue with his Getsugas and Shikai. Obviously, the reason why it's red is because of Zangetsu. So, the Shatter Shaft would happen as Ichigo would then, instead of meeting Old Man Zangetsu, he'd meet Yoruichi, or I guess a representation of her Ryatsu, not actually Yoruichi. As Yoruichi would tell Ichigo that now, she's his Zanpakuto and shit, and he'll be using her powers, or his powers now. As Ichigo would be given a katana, just regular size katana and all, nothing too much, as he would awaken, as Urahara would look down, as he would feel the presence, the sheer power coming from Ichigo, as a huge lightning aura would surround him, sort of like the Raikage's lightning form, I guess. I actually forgot his form, what it's called. But Ichigo would then jump out of the Shatter Shaft, as his sword it didn't really change shape when it went to Shikai. It was just like an emitter type Zanpakuto, I guess you could say. So Ichigo would then harness the sword, as he would tell Urahara that he was gonna kill him for even trying to put him down in that shaft. As Urahara would unsheath his blade from his cane, and Ichigo this time not really having any time to hey, is that even a real sword or shit like that. He would just be ready to fight. So what would occur next is Urahara would go into Shikai, saying the usual phrase, awaken, Benihime. What would happen next is that Ichigo would then harness all of his lightning into his blade, as he would say, Urahara, I can't really control this, but I'm gonna, I'd suggest you'd watch out. Now, I'm still gonna call this attack Getsuga Tensho, but it's gonna be completely different. As he would then swing his sword, obviously he wouldn't say Getsuga Tensho, but he would still swing his sword down, as a huge blue arc of lightning would escape from his blade, as his energy would start to surround it, almost like an armor, as it would go right for Urahara. Urahara would use his ability to create a shield, as he would then say, scream, Benihime, as a shield would appear between the attack and himself, as it'd be a huge explosion of wind just breezing through from the attack, as I guess you can say dust and the wind mixing together would create a tornado of Ryatsu. Now once the attack was, I guess the wind would blow away, Urahara was seen with a few cuts on his chest and his arms, and even a few bruises on his face. He had pretty much survived the technique, but he had still received a few injuries. Afterwards, Urahara would congratulate him on his progress, as he would say, from now on, me and you are just gonna train on your Zanjutsu, and possibly you could learn Kido and Hakuda. As Ichigo would nod his head, as we'll do a time skip for about 2 weeks. Now, in these 2 weeks, pretty much Ichigo would learn, obviously, like I said, Hakuda, learning, since Urahara was equal to Yoruichi in Hakuda, Urahara is very, compatible to teach Ichigo in Hakuda, and Kido, and Zanjutsu. Urahara would teach him low-level Kido, or just the basics like Hado number 33, number 31, and number 32, and some other Bakudos like 61, 63, and 61, 62, and 63. Yeah. And then he would learn Zanjutsu, learning about how to, fear isn't actually needed in the battle, and that you need your resolve, and the more fear you have, the duller your blade becomes. Other small tips and tricks like that. He would continue to fight, almost feeling as if he was gonna die. Now, after his whole training arc, he would realize that he would meet Yoruichi, and realize that she was his source of power. It didn't really take much to figure out. But we'll time skip to the festival. Ichigo and his friends had went to the park, or not the park, but like it's something like a park, to celebrate, the festival. There was fireworks and people gathering together as they would have a enjoyable time. Now Ichigo and Yoruichi would be laying down on the grass with their other friends as Ichigo was preparing himself for tomorrow's adventures of his quest to save Rukia from her unjustful execution. Ichigo had been saved by Rukia, and now he was simply returning the favor. Ichigo would then get up as he and Yoruichi would head back to their houses, as Yoruichi resided in the Urahara Shoten, while Ichigo lived with his dad next to the clinic. So Ichigo would rest for the night as he was ready until he would sense something coming towards him at about 1 a.m., maybe 2 a.m. As he would get up, he would see the message from Urahara as it would land on the wall. As Ichigo would still have his humorous reaction to the fact that it looked like it was one of those blood messages written by the victim's blood on his wall, as Urahara would note Ichigo's possible inquiry as we tell him that you have no humor or no taste in TV series. As Ichigo would throw his pillow on the wall, basically ranting, as he would then go back to his normal look as he would get ready, switching into his Shinigami form just out of instinct as he would head towards the Urahara Shoten. Once he would get there, Urahara would question him, "How'd you turn into your Shinigami form that easily?" As Ichigo would say, "I just felt it. I pressed my sword and I automatically went to my Shinigami clothes." As Urahara would say, "That's something not even captains can do. I'm very happy that you accomplished that." As Ichigo would kind of scratch the back of his head, as he would say, "Thanks, I guess." As Urahara would say, "Well, there's a few hours before your friends come over here. I was wondering if you wanted to get any last-minute training in." As Ichigo would just do, slight training, as he and his friends would come along. Uryu, Orihime, Chad, and obviously Yoruichi in their cat form. Now, they would head over to the Senkaimon gate, as Ichigo would then say, "So, if there's some dimension," he's making a hypothesis. "If there's some dimension that separates this world and the other, I assume there's going to be something that governs it, since I assume logically there wouldn't just be people roaming around in this realm." As Urahara would say, "That's quite the correct thesis to come up with, or theory." As he would say, "Yes, there's something that governs this realm that separates between universes. This is called the Cleaner. Now, usually the Cleaner shouldn't be here today, but if the Cleaner does emerge, you cannot use any Ryatsu-based attack since it is made to work against Ryatsu. Unless you transcend Hollow and Shinigami, there is no way you're gonna destroy the Cleaner. So I'd suggest you just keep running and use Shunpo." Or, as we look towards Uryu, I can't really remember the Quincy Flash Step. I got a little bit of it. As then, pretty much, Urahara would tell Ichigo, just grab onto the shoulders of Orihime and Chad to get to the other side, since they can Flash Step as long as you're in contact with them. As Ichigo and the rest of his friends were ready to leave, they had went through the Senkaimon gate. Now, they would be running forward, or at least in a slow jogging pace, or just running in general. Now, they'd be midway through until they would feel the rumbling of the Cleaner. Then, a few seconds later, the Cleaner would then be behind them, as Ichigo would then tell everyone to use their teleportation-based abilities, as he would tell Yoruichi to jump on his shoulder, as he would grab Orihime and Chad's shoulder and use Flash Step, while Uryu just used his own version of Flash Step to get to the other side. They would then dive through the opening on the other side, as Orihime would pretty much catch them using her Shunshun Rika shield, which she had taken time to learn due to Yoruichi's help. Now, after they would land into Soul Society, that, Yoruichi would urgently tell them to let's, head to Kukaku's place. Obviously, she didn't say Kukaku's place, but she was telling them to follow her. Now, once they would get to the gate, obviously, I know I said Kukaku's place, but Ichigo was eager. Okay, let's just say that. Now, they would get to the gate, the west gate, as once they would get there, Jibando would jump down, as he would then say, "Trespassers are not allowed through here," as he would say, "Anyone that comes through here that is not a Shinigami will be murdered or killed," as he would then get out his staff or axe, as he would go to spin in the air before kind of slashing it at Ichigo. Ichigo would unsheath his katana, as he would then clash with really no difficulty, as Ichigo would output his Ryatsu, as a bluish yellow lightning aura would surround him, as he would look at Jibando's eyes as he would tell him to lift the gates. Now, Jibando, being scared by Ichigo's manipulation of his Ryatsu, would run over and open it, saying that he was a worthy opponent. Obviously, not even worthy, he was inferior to this person's power. Jibando would then open the gate, as pretty much they would go to run through, until a man who had these snake-like features, not really snake-like features, but his eyes were almost as if closed, and he had a slimy smile, not slimy, but like sleazy smile on his face, almost manipulative, or shows the act of manipulation, as he would then extend his blade at Ichigo, saying, "Spear him, Shinso." I forgot his Sanpakuto's name for a few seconds there. His sword would pretty much extend about a few 100 meters, as it would hit Ichigo and his friends, as Ichigo would then use Bakudo number 81, Danku. A transparent shield would form in between the blade and Ichigo's friends, as the blade would stop at the shield, as it would hit the shield, but the shield would block the attack, as there'd be an explosion of Ryatsu due to the clash, and Ichigo and his friends were sent flying back a few 100 meters away. Ichigo and his friends would recover from the fall, as Shinigami were now chasing them. Ichigo and Yoruichi would start flash stepping, while Orihime and Shad went with Uryu kind of helping them via his version of the flash step. Now, Ichigo and Uryu and the rest of his friends would head towards Kukaku's house, this time not really running into Ganju, and nor staying at the old man's house. I believe that happened, but I may be wrong. Now they would make it over to Kukaku's house, where two of the guards, their names are too long for me to even pronounce, but they have similar names. Just a few letters, and they would be exactly the same. What would happen next is the guards would tell them to stop, as Yoruichi would then be seen by those guards, as they would let them in, apologizing for their insolence. They would then walk in, as Kukaku would then welcome Yoruichi, kind of saying hello to her old friend. Those two same guards would serve them tea, as they would start to discuss about what's happening and what's gonna happen. Pretty much Ichigo would say, "Well, our friend was arrested recently. Her name was Rukia Kuchiki, and we're wondering if we could use her cannon to go through the barriers of the Serete. Would that be in your range? If you wish, I could pay you as well, but I'm not really the man with any wealth. But at least the fact that I could pay you should be reasonable enough." As Kukaku would say, "I don't really need your money, but I'll do it." As she says, "Well, you need to control your reishi into a ball, as once you're in there, you have to condense your reishi so it doesn't explode or you don't die when you hit the barriers of the Serete." As Ichigo, having a little more control over his Ryatsu, as he would, especially with the help of Yoruichi, he would learn it much earlier than usual, not really needing help from Ganju, of him imagining the river and how he needs to put up the wall and the dam to control it. He had actually imagined something much larger and more complex than that of just a river. He had imagined a ocean, and the control he has is the magnetic waves. Or not the magnetic waves, but what causes the ocean to create waves. But he has to keep it to a reasonable amount. It's sort of like a balance thing. You can't have too much waves, but you can't have none at all. So he would then control his reishi from there, as he would form the spirit ball, as every one of his friends would attain it around the same time. So it'd probably take around 2 days at the most, with them having about maybe 2 weeks until her execution, due to the weird time travel thing they did, going back 2 weeks. So after the 2 days of training, Ichigo and Yoruichi and the rest of his friends would head towards the cannon. Now Yoruichi would tell Ichigo to wait up, or come back here in a sense. So, as Yoruichi would tell Ichigo that she has a cave that her and Urahara created. So as soon as they land, they need to go right there, since nobody knows where it is. Ichigo would nod his head as they would head into the cannon. As what would happen is, in this timeline, I'm going to have it where only Ichigo and Yoruichi get separated together, while Uryu and Orihime get separated together. Ganju and the Chad this time will be together. Honestly, I feel like Chad could handle the power of Ikkaku, and Ganju would just beat Yumichika the same way in canon. Now, if you're wondering, Unbound, are you high? What do you mean Chad's gonna win? Let's just say in this timeline, Ichigo gave some tips and tricks to Chad to control his Ryatsu. Though it was only a few tips and tricks, it wasn't enough to change the battle. He's not fighting Captain Kiraku, he's fighting a third sea, Ikkaku. I forgot his last name, but he's fighting Ikkaku. He's not fighting a captain, so he would have more of a chance. It would possibly maybe be a stalemate, where Chad would still ask, hey, where Rukia Kuchiki is being held. Obviously, Ikkaku, you mean that girl? Why would you want to save her? As Chad would say, well, she's our friend. We owe her that. As Ikkaku would say, once you get to the 13 courts, you would just have to keep going up there until you're in the area where most of the prisoners who are being executed have time to repent. I believe it's called the Repentance Tower. Chad would thank Ikkaku, as he would then throw him a spear so he can possibly crawl over and get his his lotion that comes from his staff. But what would happen next is we'll switch over to Ichigo and Yoruichi. Ichigo and Yoruichi are running through Soul Society, or the Serete, when they'd be stopped by none other than Kenpachi. Now, what would happen here is Kenpachi would pretty much want to fight Ichigo. He had seen the impact of him getting into the barrier, as he wanted to fight Ichigo himself. Now, what would happen is Ichigo would get his sword ready, as Yoruichi would be on his shoulder, basically telling him, to tips and don't fight him, or be careful if you were to fight him, something like that. As pretty much what would happen is they would start to fight. So Ichigo would unsheath his katana, as he and Kenpachi would clash almost animalistically. Kenpachi really only fighting with his instincts, while Ichigo, as you know, Yoruichi has animalistic instincts with the form of her, or the shape of her form. It's almost like a tiger or a lion at that point, or you could argue a cheetah. But Ichigo would then start to feel more of his instincts. He'd feel it into his gut. Maybe I should grab something on his sword. He had saw a chain hanging from his sword, as he had actually he had grabbed it with his finger and started spinning it around, before then getting the momentum before throwing it. The sword would pierce Kenpachi through his stomach, as it would come out the other way, And Ichigo would then have this other feeling in his gut. He wanted to do this. It seemed cruel, but he needed to save Rukia. There was no morals on the table now. It would then appear in front of Kenpachi, ripping out the blade as he would then rip it up his torso. Now, once this, Ichigo would see Kenpachi not even whimpering over the attack or anything like that. He was laughing. He had enjoyed that Ichigo had cut him this much, and Kenpachi's limiters would Kenpachi would subconsciously lower his limiters, stop limiting himself as much, as he would rip off his eye patch, as a yellow aura or skull would form behind him, as there'd be an explosion of Ryatsu that would escape to the air, as Yoruichi would tell Ichigo something. She would then transform, as she would say, you need to do this. Obviously, what she's saying is merging at that point. So Ichigo would merge with Yoruichi, getting a power amp, about a 10 times multiplier. It's literally like Bankai. So Ichigo would then gain a blue aura, as a huge a shape of his own would form behind him. This would be none other than sort of like his hollow mask in a sense. It's kind of hard to describe. As Ichigo then runs towards Kenpachi, as they would do last clash. Now what would happen is Kenpachi would slice down, as Ichigo would gain about 3 wounds on his chest, but Kenpachi, that was a different story there. Ichigo had pretty much ripped a hole through his chest, as he had also slit his throat, almost causing him to not breathe. But Shinigami have a different, different respiratory system. So after they would do their final clashes, with Kenpachi falling over, saying that, he would call out for his Zanpakuto. He had lost fighting, and he admitted he'd lost, as he was wondering, this person, he merged with his Zanpakuto, it looked like. Even though his Zanpakuto looked kind of lewd, he still pretty much merged with it and gained a huge power amp. He was wondering if he could have this same power or something like this, as he would look at his sword, as he would kind of feel a little sorrow. He had always thought Zanpakutos were tools, but now he had maybe started to grasp the idea of that Zanpakuto being his partner, or himself at that point. As Ichigo would then be picked up by Yoruichi, as she would transform for a few seconds, as they would head over to the cave. Now, what would happen from there is Yoruichi would use some, I believe it's not Kaido. It's the healing form Kido. I think it's called Kaido. As pretty much she would use this on Ichigo to heal his wounds, while also infusing Minato into him, since she is his Zanpakuto. That's what I said that right. So infusing any more power into him would just kind of raise his high speed factor, which he had gained from wielding her, and also his whole inner hollow in a sense. Even though it wasn't his inner hollow, but it is what it is. Now, instead of the whole Ichigo training for Bankai this time, he will be having time. So when Ichigo wakes up, he senses Byakuya. Now, what would happen here is, Ichigo would then go there. He was still just as reckless, but he wanted to save Rukia, have this small chance he could to save Rukia. He then used the tool and say, fly, as he would go flying towards the Repentance Tower. He'd be flying up in the air, as we'll switch over to Ukitake's perspective, forgive me. And what would happen is Ukitake would grab Byakuya's wrist, telling him, it's against the rules to release Shika even in wartime. As Byakuya would say, how long have you been asleep? Wartime has basically escalated to allowing Shikai release in even Bankai. As Ukitake's eyes would widen, as he'd say, so this is how much trouble the Ryoka have caused? Maybe they were even behind Captain Aizen's murder and the possible defeat of Kenpachi. Now suddenly they would feel a presence over them, a Ryatsu output, as they would say, wait, I feel something coming towards us. It's not even the power of a captain, it's like the power of the Sotaiko. Obviously this means the head captain. As his eyes, Byakuya's eyes would widen, and so would Ukitake's. And suddenly a huge lightning burst would come out from the bridge, like the floor, the ground of the bridge. And suddenly, once it would disappear, Ichigo would stand there with his sword resting on his shoulder, as he would have his cloak on, his desert cloak on, whatever he could put on, as he was ready. He was going to defeat Byakuya and hopefully save Rukia. Now, what would happen here is Byakuya would unsheath the sword as he would say, "Ryoka boy, I thought I'd deal with you in the human world," before he would then try to use the same Senku cutting style or sword style to cut Ichigo's Ryatsu sources, or the core of his Ryatsu in a sense. As this wouldn't work, something weird would happen. Ichigo would manage to actually react to Byakuya's flash steps and actually be even more faster than him. As Ichigo would hint at this, saying, "You know that one person who you can never beat in tag? Let's just say that one person had now become my power source. So that means you are now just as inferior as you were to this person." Obviously, Byakuya's eyes would widen as he would know what Ichigo was talking about. He was talking about the goddess of the flash, Yoruichi Shihoin. So Byakuya would then suddenly harden his eyes as his resolve would kind of slip a little bit before he would unsheath his sword, or I guess get it back into the vertical stance, before he would then say, "Scatter." Senbone, as he would be interrupted as a bandage would wrap around his blade. Obviously, this would be Yoruichi canceling his Shikai release. Ichigo would then be scolded by Yoruichi for basically interfering, or just coming here when they had enough time. As this time she wouldn't really knock him out and then put the healing pill in him, but she would just walk up to him and literally force the pill down his throat. Not force it, but it was kind of comical. Obviously, he was unexpected, but he would still swallow it. This pill was the healing pill used by the Shihoans, so it was like a senzu bead at that point. But it was a little slower, so it was it usually worked a little bit after the battle. So pretty much what would happen is Yoruichi and Byakuya would have their tag game before Ichigo would then be told by Yoruichi to get out of here, and they'll save Rukia later. Now Ichigo would abide by this as they would head back to the cave. Now once they would get there, pretty much this would start their 3 days of training. But this time, it's not going to be the same training we know what happened in the canonical timeline. This time, it's going to be the training that Ichigo has to attain his mask. Now, what would happen is Ichigo would be told by Yoruichi that he has something that other people don't have. He has a sentient hollow inside of him, as the hollow would always evolve as he evolves, as basically being as strong as him, or maybe a little bit stronger than him. So Yoruichi tells him that you have the advantage since it's in your mindscape. You have ultimate control over your mind. So if you were to go in there and possibly absorb his power, then you would possibly gain a huge power up. As Ichigo would kind of be excited at this, trying to do anything he can to be powerful enough to save Rukia. Now what would happen is Yoruichi would tell Ichigo to get into the meditative stance, as Ichigo would do that. Now what would happen is he would go into his inner world, as he would see Zangetsu with the same Shikai blade that he has in canon. Obviously he wouldn't really adopt Ichigo's power, he would just have his own. He is a Zanpakuto. He would just use the power that he has. He's not going to use Yoruichi's Zanpakuto or Yoruichi's as a power source. So pretty much Zangetsu would tell Ichigo, saying, "Look who came here. I know you're what you're here for. You know that? I can hear everything that you do outside. I gain power as you gain power. It's something like a never-ending cycle. You'll never be able to beat me. You know why? There's one difference that you can't actually learn. That's between me and you. It's the thing is, I use my instinct to fight. You just use your logic. You may tap into that instinct a few times whenever you feel your life is in danger. You might go back to your origins, but then you'll just revert back to your usual state of logic. You'd never use logic in a battle, but I'll show you why. I'll show you the difference in power. As Zangetsu would kind of unsheath the sword from its bandages as he would run towards Ichigo. Ichigo would then summon his Zanpakuto or his katana as he would start clashing with Zangetsu. As it would almost be like an elegant battle, but disgusting at the same time. And if you mean, what do I mean by disgusting? It was like two animals fighting. There was nothing beautiful you can see about it, but something beautiful at the same time. As Zangetsu and Ichigo would continue clashing, what Ichigo would see an opening. He'd say, there's one difference between me and you. You can't use Kido. As Zangetsu would widen his eyes, as Ichigo would then say, Bakudo number 61, Rikujo Kuro. As 6 bars of light would slam into Zangetsu's mid-side. Ichigo would then not let up, as he would then say, Bakudo number 62, Haiparankai. I think I said that right. But Ichigo, like a blue pole would form in Ichigo's hand as he would throw it. Now, this one pole would turn into about 100 as it would stab into Zangetsu's chest, arm, keeping him in place. And then Ichigo would then appear in front of Zangetsu as his sword would become lightning itself, as his whole body would then be surrounded in lightning, as his eyes even turned blue at that point due to the amount of lightning he was carrying, before he would then slice down. Zangetsu would then pretty much get stabbed through the chest, as he would have been sort of in a sense purified, or Ichigo would start to absorb him. Zangetsu would try to say his last words, and he would. He would tell Ichigo that he was always his Zanpakuto, and that Yoruichi was simply a new power that came into his life. As Zangetsu would say, you're simply now returning yourself to yourself. I was just an extension of your soul. So any power I have will just be reverted back to you. As he would then say, but one thing, if you do falter or you do die, trust me, I'm gonna come out there and I'm gonna stomp on your face and take back your crown, because I deserve it more than you do. Obviously, he's just the last part was just him being arrogant. But Zangetsu would then disappear back into Ichigo's soul, as on the outside, Yoruichi had been fighting a hollow fight Ichigo, but she was still, it was a little hard for her, but she still managed to do it. After the whole fight, Ichigo would then be seen with a hollow mask. Not the first hollow mask he gains after getting his Shinigami powers, but the one he gains after becoming Vasta Lorde. As due to Yoruichi becoming a Zanpakuto, his hollow had evolved to a Vasta Lorde, so that would lead to him getting that mask. So, what would happen next is we'll be going over the rescue of Rukia. Now, that had all happened in about less than a day. So he would spend the rest of the 2 days trying to use his mask to get his time limit extended. So he got his time limit to about 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes at the most, if he really pushed and used like Yoruichi or his power. As the same part with Renji coming down and training his Bankai would happen, but it wasn't because Ichigo beat him, it was because he had sensed Ichigo's powers and he had came down there and wanted to fight, but obviously Ichigo easily put him down, as Renji decided that it was time to save Rukia. There was no playing around with his duty. He had been friends with Rukia first. So Renji would then train his Bankai, as obviously on the day of the execution, Ichigo had the Shihoan cloak on, as pretty much Yoruichi said that would look good on him, so why not? So Renji would then be the first to leave, as he was going to intercept Byakuya Kuchiki. Ichigo would then tell him the tricks about, and also Yoruichi would tell him the tricks of his Zanpakuto and how to avoid them, saying that there was a safe zone where Byakuya stands, and then no pedo actually gets through this. So if you were to manage to get into this, you'd be forced to close it and maybe possibly hurt himself in the process. Obviously, the whole Renji versus Byakuya fight would go a little bit different. Renji would kind of be on par with Byakuya and Shikai, and then, Renji would go Bankai, as he wouldn't actually start to cut Byakuya, managed to cut his arm, his shoulder, and even his chest at one point, as Byakuya would just end it all by going into Senbon Sakura Kageyoshi, and then that's when Byakuya pretty much ended Renji. Renji would still be bloodied as he would have finally reached Byakuya, and Byakuya would congratulate him, saying that he still needs time with his Bankai, but he had definitely reached him. It was in no water reflection, he had actually reached Byakuya. Byakuya would then walk off, leaving his scarf there, as Renji would lay there, bloodied. The point of the fight wasn't to win, it was to delay Byakuya and possibly even gain respect. That's been his goal, since Byakuya had neglected his lieutenant and hadn't actually had the same respect for Renji. Now, Ichigo would be watching from afar as the execution were to take place. The Rukia would then be bound by a bunch of monks, it seemed like, as she would be risen by the air with bounds holding her up. The Sokyoku would then form as it would turn into a bird, as everyone would then, everyone with awe at this sight. It was a beautiful, elegant bird, just showing its fire itself, as the bird would then go to destroy Rukia. Ichigo would then appear between this, as he would grab the bird's head and absorb it, or not absorb it, but nullify it in a sense. He would then pretty much, like I said, absorb the power, as he would then release it into the air. Obviously, this would give enough time for, release it back into the air, as this would stop the threat of Rukia dying, and Kiraku and Ukitake would seal the Sokyoku using the Shihohin clan seal, I believe is what it's called. But then, like I said, they would seal it, as Soifan would pretty much go fight Yoruichi, as Byakuya would fight Ichigo. Byakuya would clash swords with Ichigo, as this time Byakuya would have more respect for Ichigo. Obviously, Ichigo being trained by Yoruichi, he should be faster than Byakuya, and this is why Byakuya respected him. But he did not have more experience in Zanjutsu or in Kido or in Ho-Ho. So obviously Ichigo would slice down and Byakuya would start to whisper something. Hidden Ho-Ho in technique number 3, as he would then disappear, as a piece of cloth would then be left, being his scarf, or a piece of his coat jacket, not his jacket, not the Hayori, but the under that there was a white cloak he had worn. So he then, he would then see Byakuya a little further away, as Ichigo would say, "So you mastered it, right? Ho-Ho technique number 3. It was I'd congratulate you, but I shouldn't really congratulate you since you were the first to learn it." As Ichigo would then go into Shikai, as a lightning aura would form around him, as what would happen is Yoruichi would feel like Ichigo's using like her power or his power, so that means she would also get an amp. So her body would just naturally go into Shunko, as obviously Soifan would recognize this, as Ichigo would correct her, Yoruichi would correct Soifan on what the technique was, before then quickly beating her. Yoruichi had went towards Ichigo's direction to go into Bankai, because that's usually him and her merging together, and that's Bankai. Byakuya had went Bankai, as he was pretty much in this cat and mouse game with trying to catch Ichigo into his blades. Ichigo had grown tired of it. He had started slicing and dicing, as all the petals would then be destroyed or sliced, as he would appear behind Byakuya and slice his sword down, saying, "Is this a miracle?" As he would slice his sword down, and this time not stabbing into his torso, he would literally just slice vertically, and there'd be a huge slash throughout from his shoulder all the way down to his waist, as this was a pretty deep cut, almost cutting off his arm. As Byakuya would back up, as he would cover his arm in his Senbon Sakura petals to protect him, in a sense, becoming like armor, or not even armor, but sealing the wound. As Yoruichi would appear behind Ichigo, as they would go into his Bankai, similar to how Asashiro does. Ichigo would then suddenly gain this, it wouldn't be much of like a transformational Bankai, it would just be more of an amp, like a 10 times amp. Like I said, Shikai gives a 5 times amp, so this time it'll get a 10 times amp, almost being like a 50 times multiplier. Ichigo would then swipe on his mask, as Byakuya would stare at it. His lightning had become red, As Ichigo's eyes would turn. His pupil had been yellow and the rest part of his eyes were black. It had looked almost hollow-like. As Byakuya would feel this fear in his heart. As Byakuya, having the blood, would then use Senkei, Senbun Zakura, Kageyoshi. As Byakuya would create a domain with his Senkei, as him and Ichigo would start battling, with Byakuya having the terrain advantage, as every time he needed a new sword, he would just form it, and then suddenly he would start to get more ideas. Out of nowhere, about half the blades would start going towards Ichigo, as Ichigo would have to defend, but suddenly Byakuya would be bold. He would appear in front of Ichigo going to slice him. He would either have to block Byakuya's attack and get hit, or, how do I say this, defend against the other blades but get hit by Byakuya. So what would happen is Ichigo would then form a Bakudo number 81 Danku behind him, his back, as all the swords would pierce the shield, but not penetrate it or break it. As Ichigo would then be stabbed in the foot by Byakuya, as he would then pretty much use Byakurai through his shoulder. Ichigo this time would just rip out the sword as he would crush it. He would then pretty much raise his sword as he would then use Getsuga Tensho. A huge red wave of Ryatsu would escape from his blade, as this would be infused with lightning, almost being like black lightning. As he then send this at Byakuya, as Byakuya would try to back up from it. Ichigo would then be there, as he would hold his shoulder, as he would then raise his sword before slicing down. There would be a huge explosion, as once Byakuya was revealed, he'd be having deep breaths, as there was a cut across his face, and his neck had scars and bruises, as so would his chest and his arms and his leg. Everywhere upon his body he was injured in some shape or form. Byakuya would then offer that they would end this in one attack, since Ichigo was injured himself. He had a hole through his shoulder, he was breathing deeply, had cuts across his body. They were pretty equal, or Ichigo was a little bit higher. But Byakuya had an ace in his pocket, I guess you could say. As he would then say, Shukute Hakten, or the Emperor technique. So he would then compress all of his Senkei ability, as it would become angelic, almost white, as he would gain wings, and a huge circular, shape would appear on his back, as he would go into the technique. As he would then say, Shukute Hakten. As he would then say, Kurosaki Ichigo, I underestimated your ability, your power, but for now, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to kill you right here, right now, and then I'm going to execute Rukia myself. I have to uphold the laws of Soul Society. Or Ichigo would say, I'm going to fight against the law because that's what I believe in. That's my ideal. As they would then clash, as they would make their own battle cry. But Byakuya doesn't really do a battle cry, so it was mostly Ichigo. Now, once Ichigo then uses Getsuga with his lightning ability, his Shunko, then there'd be a huge explosion as the Senkei would shatter. Ichigo had broken through the domain, and after that, Byakuya and Ichigo were standing opposite to each other, as they're not facing to each other, as suddenly all the cuts and bruises would start to reveal themselves. Ichigo had gotten a cut across his shoulders and on his chest, while Byakuya had gotten relatively the same. Byakuya then say, I lose this battle. I'll let Rukia live. As he would flash step off, as pretty much what would happen is he would head over to the 4th division. Ichigo would unmerge with Yoruichi, as he would start to scream out his battle cry as he had finally won. He had started to even celebrate with Yoruichi, as he was in this mode in his body, or he was just excited in general. But what happened next is Aizen would come down, with Renji, as the whole Ichigo getting mollywopped would happen, since Aizen is still stronger than Ichigo, but that didn't matter to him. His friend would save, and all Aizen did was take the Ogyoku. Now, after wondering, why would Ichigo think this way? I mean, Soul Society wasn't really his concern, and so what if Aizen became... No, I'm just kidding. But basically, Ichigo would then be, get his whole, half split off, almost split off, a little bit inch was left. As Aizen would then leave, going to Wake Mundo, as that would have been the end of the Soul Society arc. That'll be the movie part 1 of 2. I actually never done these stuff before, so it'll be the first time. But without further ado, guys, I hope you enjoy this part. For the next part, you guys are gonna have to get 15 likes. 15? Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I have 2,566 subscribers, so 68. So it should be reasonable. But without further ado, guys, I hope you guys have a good day. But peace out.